In the middle of the celebratory dinner, my daughter raised her wine glass and shouted in front of 30 relatives, "Mom is our personal ATM. Order whatever you want off the menu." Laughter erupted throughout the restaurant. I watched as everyone began pointing at the most expensive items on the list: Maine lobsters, imported French wines, and desserts with names they couldn't even pronounce. The server rushed from table to table, taking endless orders. I sat frozen in my chair while my daughter celebrated my public humiliation as if it were a hilarious joke. When the head waiter finally presented the bill on a small silver platter, the number hit me like a physical blow. $1,000. 30 pairs of eyes were fixed on me, waiting. I took a deep breath, calmly picked up my purse, and said with a smile, "I need to use the restroom for a moment." I stood up. I walked through the tables with my back straight and slipped out the main door. I didn't look back. I hailed a cab and disappeared into the night. What happened next is something they still recall with horror. My name is Lena Dubois. I am 69 years old, and for most of my life, I was an English literature professor at a public high school in Atlanta, Georgia. I am not wealthy, but I'm certainly not poor. I've been a widow for 8 years. My husband, Isaiah, died of a sudden heart attack one Sunday afternoon while watering the plants on our porch. Everything changed after that, but not in the way one might expect. It changed because I became something I never intended to be, the solution to every single problem my family had. Valerie is my only daughter. She is 42. She studied graphic design, but never truly committed to a career. She always had an excuse. The market was tough, clients didn't pay well, she needed better connections. I, like a good mother, always supported her. I paid for her entire college education. I bought her first professional computer. I financed 2 failed business attempts before the 3rd month. When she married Derek Jackson, a nice guy without much ambition, I paid half of the wedding costs. When they had trouble with rent, I helped them for 6 months straight. And so it went, again and again, because that's what mothers do, right? They sacrifice, they give without expecting anything in return. They are the invisible support that never fails. But the truth is, I did expect something. Not money, not gifts, just a little respect. A call once in a while that wasn't followed by a request. A visit that didn't end with Valerie subtly checking my wallet to see how much cash I was carrying. I wanted her to see me as her mother, not as her personal bank. But over the years, I learned that to Valerie, I was exactly that, an ATM with easily ignored feelings. The weight of generosity. After Isaiah's death, the pension I received was modest but decent. Combined with my life savings from decades of work, I had enough to live with dignity. I could have traveled, seen Europe as I always dreamed. I could have bought that small house near the beach in Hilton Head, South Carolina, that I saw once, but no. Every time I saved a little money, Valerie would show up with a new crisis. The car broke down, Derek lost his job again, the kids needed tuition money, and I, as always, would open my purse. It wasn't just Valerie. My sister, Aisha Wells, also had a habit of calling just before the end of the month, always with the same sweet, false tone. "Lena, darling sister, could you lend me a little? You know how things are." Aisha lived in a bigger house than mine, drove a newer car, and dined out every weekend. But according to her, I was the one with money to spare. The loans never came back, not a single one. After a while, I stopped calling them loans and accepted them for what they truly were, forced gifts. Then there was Rochelle, my cousin. Every time we met at a family gathering, she'd find a way to sidle up and whisper some urgent need in my ear. Her son Malik needed money for college applications. She had to pay a medical debt. Her washing machine broke. It was always something. And I always ended up opening my purse, pulling out some bills while she hugged me and called me an angel. I remember one Christmas, 3 years ago, when Valerie hosted dinner at her house. I arrived with gifts for everyone, as usual. I had spent weeks finding the perfect present for each person. For Valerie, a set of ceramic skillets she'd mentioned wanting. For Derek, an olive green shirt I saw in a boutique that I thought was his style. For the children, toys I knew they would adore. When it was time to open the gifts, Valerie unwrapped hers, glanced at it for just 2 seconds and said, "Oh, thanks, Mom. although I would have preferred cash so I could buy what I really need. There was no hug, no kiss, just that sentence that sliced through me like a cold knife. That night, as I drove back to my house, I cried the entire way, not over the money spent on gifts, but because I finally understood that to my daughter, I was not a person. I was a source of resources, a means to an end. Worst of all, I had allowed things to get to this point. Year after year, sacrifice after sacrifice, I had built this monster with my own 2 hands. But that December night was not enough to make me react. Not yet. I kept giving, I kept paying, I kept being the silent, reliable family ATM until that cursed day arrived. The day of the restaurant, the day everything exploded, the day Valerie decided to publicly humiliate me. And I finally decided that enough was truly enough. The trap at the Monarch Room. It all started with a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my living room reading Toni Morrison's Beloved, a book I'd read countless times, but that always brought me comfort. The phone rang, and I saw Valerie's name on the screen. I hesitated for a moment before answering. Lately, every call from her ended with a request for money, but she was my daughter, and mothers always answer. "Mom, I have wonderful news," she said in an unusually cheerful voice. "I want to organize a special family dinner to thank you for everything you've done for us over all these years. You deserve it." I was silent, processing her words. Valerie wanting to thank me without asking for anything in return. Something in my stomach twisted with suspicion, but I immediately felt guilty for doubting my own child. "A dinner?" I asked cautiously. "Yes, Mom, at the Monarch Room. You know, that elegant place downtown. I'll invite the whole family. It'll be beautiful. This Saturday at 8 o'clock. Does that work for you?" I accepted, even though a part of me already knew this wasn't a celebration. It was a setup. I spent the days leading up to the dinner with a mixture of hope and anxiety. I desperately wanted to believe that Valerie finally saw me, that she had matured, that she understood all I had sacrificed for her. I bought an ivory-colored dress, simple and elegant. I had my hair professionally done. I even bought a pair of pearl earrings I'd seen in a store window and never dared to buy because I was always saving to help someone else. For once, I wanted to feel special. On Saturday, I arrived at the Monarch Room exactly at 8 o'clock. It was one of those places where the important people of Atlanta went for special occasions: high ceilings, crystal chandeliers, cream-colored tablecloths, and servers in impeccable suits. I had never been there. When I entered, a hostess greeted me with a professional smile and guided me toward the private room Valerie had reserved. When the doors opened, I froze. There were 30 people there. 30. Valerie stood next to a long table, wearing an emerald green dress that probably cost more than I made in a month. Derek was beside her with a glass of wine in his hand and that awkward smile he always wore when he knew something was wrong but didn't dare say it. I saw Aisha seated near the head of the table with that glint of satisfaction in her eyes that she always got when she smelled an opportunity to take advantage of someone. Rochelle was there too, along with her son Malik. And there were more people, cousins I hadn't seen in years, Valerie's neighbors, even some of Derek's friends I barely knew. "Mom, you made it!" Valerie shouted, approaching me with open arms. She hugged me, but it was one of those cold, calculated hugs given for the benefit of the crowd. "Look how many people came to celebrate you. Everyone is here because of you." I felt a knot in my throat. This didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like an ambush. But I was already there. 30 pairs of eyes were watching me, so I smiled and greeted everyone, though my hands were shaking slightly. They seated me in the center of the main table, in a chair that resembled a small throne. Valerie stood up and tapped her glass with a knife to get everyone's attention. The room fell silent. "I want to make a toast," she began, and my heart swelled for a second with the hope that perhaps, just perhaps, this was real. To my mother, Lena Dubois, the woman who has always been there, the one who never says no, the one who always has open hands to help us. Up to that point, everything sounded fine. People started applauding. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but then Valerie continued. And with every word, my hope crumbled. Because let's be honest, she said with a laugh that cut through me like broken glass, Mom is our personal ATM, and tonight we're going to enjoy it. Order whatever you want off the menu. It's all on her. The room exploded in cheers and applause. I watched as everyone eagerly grabbed their menus. Aisha practically lunged for hers, pointing to the most expensive dishes with her finger. Rochelle imperiously called the waiter over and started ordering without even looking at me. Malik ordered a $300 bottle of high-end bourbon. People I didn't even know started ordering lobster, imported cuts of meat, French wine, appetizers, main courses, desserts. The chaos was total. I sat there, frozen, my hands resting in my lap. The ivory dress that had made me feel special now felt like a ridiculous costume. The pearl earrings weighed on me like stones. I wanted to get up. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask Valerie how she dared to humiliate me this way. But I couldn't. 30 people were there. The restaurant was full. I felt that if I opened my mouth, the only thing that would come out was a ragged, tearing sob. Valerie sat down next to me, still chuckling. She put a hand on my shoulder and whispered in my ear, "Don't be mad, Mom. It's just a joke. Besides, you've always wanted the family to be together, right? Well, here we all are thanks to you." Her breath smelled of expensive wine. Her words were poison disguised as sweetness. The servers began bringing the plates, one after another after another. Mountains of food, bottles that were emptied and immediately replaced. People laughed, talked, and took photos. No one was truly looking at me. I was just the excuse for this feast, the source of money that made everyone else's fun possible. At one point, Aisha raised her glass toward me and yelled, "To Lena, the most generous!" Everyone toasted, and I smiled a smile that hurt worse than any physical blow. The escape. 2 hours passed. 2 eternal hours. Finally, the head waiter approached with the silver platter. Folded carefully upon it was the bill. He placed it in front of me with a professional bow. I unfolded the paper with trembling hands. My eyes scanned the endless list of dishes, drinks, suggested gratuities, and at the bottom, in large, clear numbers, $15,000. That was more than half of my annual savings. That was the trip to Europe I never took. That was the beach house I never bought. That was my dignity converted into figures. 30 pairs of eyes were fixed on me. Valerie watched with that confident smile of someone who always gets what they want. Aisha raised her eyebrows, waiting. Rochelle was already taking out her phone to snap a photo. And in that moment, I felt something I had never felt before. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't disappointment. It was clarity. A cold, sharp clarity, like a surgeon's scalpel. I finally saw the truth. And the truth was, if I didn't save myself right then and there, no one else would. So I took a deep breath, folded the bill neatly, set it on the table, picked up my purse, stood up with all the dignity I had left, and said in a soft but firm voice, "I'm going to the restroom for a moment." And I started walking. I walked between the tables with my back straight and my head held high. Every step distanced me from those 30 people who had used me for years. I could feel their eyes on me, but none of them suspected a thing. Why would they? I had always been compliant, always paid, always smiled, and accepted my role as the family ATM. They had no reason to think this time would be any different. I passed the waiter who had served us all night. He smiled at me with professional courtesy. I crossed the main dining room, where other families were eating peacefully, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the private room. I reached the hallway that led to the restrooms and kept going. My legs moved on their own, guided by a survival instinct I didn't know I possessed. I reached the reception desk. The hostess who had greeted me upon arrival was distracted by her computer. She didn't see me pass. I pushed open the glass door, and the cool night air hit my face. It was April, and the breeze still carried that pleasant coolness. I took a deep breath for the first time in hours. My lungs filled with clean air, air that wasn't contaminated by the cruel laughter of my family. I looked around. The street was lit by antique lamps. A few taxis were waiting on the corner, and in that moment, I made the most important decision of my life. I walked toward the first cab. The driver, an older gentleman with a gray mustache, looked at me kindly. "Where to, ma'am?" he asked. "The Greyhound bus terminal," I replied without hesitation. My voice sounded strange, as if it belonged to someone else, a braver person, a person who had finally woken up. During the ride, I pulled my cell phone from my purse. I had 3 messages from Valerie. The first said, "Mom, where are you? The waiter is asking for you." The second, "Mom, it's not funny, come back." The third, "Mom, answer the phone." I turned off the phone. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had heard in years. We reached the terminal. I paid the driver with a $20 bill and told him to keep the change. I entered the building. The terminal was almost empty at that hour. Only a few lonely travelers waited on the plastic benches. I walked up to the ticket counter. A young woman in a green uniform attended to me with a tired smile. "Where are you traveling?" she asked. I thought for a moment. I needed to go somewhere where I could think, where I could breathe, where no one knew me. I remembered Diane, my childhood friend. We had met in elementary school more than 50 years ago. She had moved to Charlotte, North Carolina after getting married, but we always kept in touch, sporadic calls, Christmas cards. She was one of the few people in my life who had never asked me for anything, who called only to see how I was, who remembered my birthday without ulterior motives. "Charlotte," I told the woman at the counter. "The next bus leaves in 40 minutes, she replied. "Perfect," I said, and bought the ticket. $25, a ridiculously low price compared to the $15,000 my family expected me to pay that night. I sat on one of the benches to wait. The ivory dress I had bought with such excitement now felt like a shroud. I took off the pearl earrings and put them in my purse. I loosened my hair, which I had styled so carefully, and for the first time all night, I allowed myself to feel the rage, to feel the humiliation, to feel the pain of having been betrayed by the person I loved most in the world. But I also felt something else, something I hadn't expected. I felt relief, an immense relief, like taking off a shoe that has been hurting you for hours. I realized that I had been carrying an invisible weight for years, the weight of expectations, the weight of being everyone's savior, the weight of being unable to say no. And in that moment, sitting on a plastic bench in a bus terminal with a wrinkled dress and smudged makeup, I finally let that weight drop. I thought about Valerie, about how I had raised her after Isaiah's death, all the nights I stayed up working to pay for her college, all the sacrifices I made so she could have a better life than mine. And I wondered when everything had gone so wrong. When had my generosity become her entitlement? When did I stop being her mother and become her resource? The answer was painful, but clear. I had allowed it to happen. Every time I said yes when I wanted to say no. Every time I opened my purse when I should have closed it. Every time I swallowed my pride and accepted being treated as less than human. I had built that monster, and now I had finally made the decision to leave it behind. The silence of the phone. The loudspeaker announced the departure of the bus to Charlotte. I stood up, smoothed my dress, and walked toward the platform. The bus was old but clean. I got on and found my seat, number 14, next to the window. I sat down and leaned my head against the cool glass. The engine roared, and we began to move. Atlanta, with all its painful memories, began to fade behind me. I looked out the window. The city lights flickered in the darkness like fallen stars. I thought about Valerie receiving the news that I wasn't coming back. I thought about her panic when the waiter told her someone had to pay that $15,000. I thought about Aisha and Rochelle scrambling for excuses to escape. I thought about the chaos, the confusion, the accusations, and I felt no guilt. I felt no remorse. I only felt a strange and liberating peace. I took my cell phone out of my purse. It was still off. I turned it on for a moment, just to do one thing. I opened my contacts and looked up Diane's number. I wrote a short message. "Diane, it's Lena. I'm heading to Charlotte. Can I stay with you for a few days? It's urgent." I sent the message and immediately turned the phone off again before Valerie's desperate calls and messages could start pouring in. The bus sped down the dark highway. Some passengers were sleeping, others were looking at their phones. I simply watched the night pass. And for the first time in 8 years since Isaiah's death, I felt like I was taking control of my own life. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know how Valerie would react. I didn't know if we could ever repair our relationship. But in that moment, on that bus taking me away from everything I knew I had done the right thing. Because sometimes loving your family means pulling away from them. Sometimes the only way to save yourself is to disappear. And sometimes the bravest act isn't staying and enduring. It's standing up and walking out the door without looking back. The bus cut through the darkness of the highway as I tried to process what I had just done. My hands were still shaking slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline. It was as if my body was finally reacting to years of silent abuse. I looked at my reflection in the window. A 69-year-old woman with smudged makeup and messy hair stared back. But there was something new in her eyes, something I hadn't seen in a long time. Determination. The trip to Charlotte would take approximately 3 hours. 3 hours to think, 3 hours to fully understand what I had left behind. I closed my eyes, and inevitably, my mind went back to the restaurant. I could picture the scene with painful clarity. Valerie probably waited 5 minutes before starting to worry, then 10, then 15. Eventually, she would have sent Derek to check the ladies' room for me. He would have knocked on the door, calling my name uncertainly. Nothing. Then they would have asked a waitress to check, and the waitress would have returned empty-handed and confused. I could see Valerie rising from her chair in that emerald green dress, a dress I likely helped pay for, walking through the entire restaurant looking for me, checking every corner, asking the servers. And finally, as the terrible truth began to sink into her brain, the panic would set in. Because the bill was still there, $15,000 that someone had to pay, and the ATM had vanished. I wondered how long it would have taken them to call the manager. I imagined the uncomfortable conversation. Valerie probably tried to use her charm, that sweet smile that always worked on me, but that held no power over strangers. The manager, a professional who had seen all sorts of situations in his restaurant, probably explained calmly but firmly that someone had to pay, that they couldn't just leave, and that if necessary, he would call the police. The police. That word must have dropped on Valerie like a bucket of ice water. 30 people watching her, 30 witnesses to her humiliation, the very humiliation she had inflicted on me. The irony was so perfect, it almost made me smile in the darkness of the bus. What would she have done then? She likely tried to call me once, twice, 10 times, but my phone was off. Dead to the world, dead to her. Then would come the desperation. She would call Aisha, begging her to pay at least a part of it. But Aisha, my sister who always had excuses for not repaying loans, surely found 1,000 reasons not to help. I don't have my wallet. My card is blocked. My husband handles the money. The excuses would flow like water. Rochelle would have done the same, and Malik and all the other relatives who had eaten and drunk as if the world were ending tomorrow. Suddenly, all those people who called me generous, who toasted me, who celebrated my supposed goodness, would become ghosts, disappearing like smoke. Because it's easy to love the ATM when it dispenses cash. But when the ATM refuses to pay, the love evaporates. The bus made a brief stop at a gas station. Some passengers got off to stretch their legs or buy something to eat. I remained seated, not hungry, not thirsty, just left alone with my thoughts. Through the window, I saw a young family, a father, a mother, and a small girl. The girl was eating ice cream and laughing. Her parents looked at her with genuine love, unconditional love, love without invoices. And I felt a pang of sadness for everything Valerie and I had lost, because there was a time when our relationship was different, when she was little and hugged me just because, when she told me, "I love you, Mom," without expecting anything in return, when I was her hero, not her bank. Where had that little girl gone? When had my daughter transformed into this cruel, calculating woman who had publicly humiliated me? The answer, once again, was uncomfortable. I had contributed to that transformation. Every time I gave her money without teaching her the value of work, every time I solved her problems without letting her face the consequences of her decisions, every time I rescued her when I should have let her fall so she could learn to stand up on her own. I had been a loving mother, yes, but I had also been a weak mother, and that weakness had created a monster. The bus started moving again. I checked the time on the station clock, almost 11 o'clock at night. By this time, the situation at the restaurant had likely reached its most critical point. Valerie would have had to face reality. Someone had to pay, and that someone would have to be her. I imagined Derek pulling out all his credit cards, calculating limits, trying to scrape together the $15,000 across multiple cards, sweating, shaking, cursing the day he married my daughter. And then would come the shame. 30 people witnessing the organizer of the event unable to pay the bill. The waiters impatient, the manager with his arms crossed. Some relatives would likely have already found excuses to leave. I have to work early tomorrow. The kid has school. It's getting late. One by one, they would abandon the sinking ship. Because that's how it works. People are only with you when everything is going well. When things get tough, they disappear. I thought about Aisha, my sister, who always bragged about her big house and perfect life, but never had the money to repay my loans. She would surely have been one of the first to flee. She probably slipped out the back door to avoid being seen, and Rochelle, with her son Malik, would have done the same. All those parasites who had fed off my generosity for years would now scatter like roaches when the light is turned on. The mental image gave me a dark satisfaction. It wasn't exactly revenge. It was justice. It was the universe finally balancing the scales. For years, I had been the one who paid, the one who solved, the one who bore all the problems. Now, for once, they would have to face the consequences of their own actions. I turned on my phone for a moment, just a moment. I needed to see if Diane had replied. And there was her message, like a beacon of light in the middle of the storm. "Lena, of course you can stay. Are you okay? You'll arrive in about 2 more hours. My house is your house. I'm always waiting for you." My eyes filled with tears, tears of relief, tears of gratitude, because in the midst of all that darkness, there was at least one person who offered me refuge without asking how much money I had in my purse. Before turning the phone off again, I saw the notifications. 53 missed calls from Valerie, 28 messages, 7 calls from Aisha, 4 from Rochelle, even 3 from unknown numbers that were likely other relatives desperately looking for me. I didn't open any messages. I didn't listen to any voicemails. I just turned off the phone and stored it deep in my purse. The bus continued on its way. Some passengers slept soundly. Others watched movies on their phones with headphones. I just watched the darkness pass, and with every mile that took me away from Atlanta, I felt like I was breathing a little better, as if I had been underwater for years and was finally surfacing. I thought about what would come next. I would have to face the consequences of what I had done. Valerie wouldn't give up easily. She would try to manipulate me. She would use guilt, emotional blackmail, all the tools she had perfected over the years. She would call crying, saying I had abandoned her, that I was a bad mother, that how could I do this to her after everything we had been through together? But I was ready, or at least I wanted to believe I was ready, because this time would be different. This time, I wouldn't yield. This time, my answer would be a clear, firm, definitive no. The no I should have said years ago. The no that would have saved me so much pain. The no that would finally give me back my dignity. A new beginning in Charlotte. The bus began to slow down. A sign on the highway indicated that we were approaching Charlotte. My heart started beating faster, not from fear, but from anticipation. I was about to begin a new chapter of my life. A chapter where I would not be anyone's ATM, where I would choose whom to help and whom not to help, where my value would be determined not by how much money I could give, but by who I was as a person. The city lights began to appear on the horizon. Charlotte, a city I barely knew, but which now represented my freedom, my escape, my rebirth. The bus pulled into the Charlotte terminal at 11:30 at night. The city was quieter than Atlanta, with a colonial air that could be felt even in the bus station. I got off with my purse on my shoulder, feeling the weight of the night upon me, but also a strange lightness in my chest. It was as if I had left behind not only my family, but years of invisible chains. Diane was waiting for me at the main entrance. I recognized her immediately despite the years. She still had that short silver hair and those warm brown eyes. When she saw me, she ran toward me and hugged me without asking questions. That hug was different from any I had received in years. There were no expectations behind it. There were no ulterior motives, just genuine love from someone who cared about me without expecting anything in return. "You don't have to explain anything right now," she whispered in my ear as she hugged me. "First, let's go home. You need rest." I nodded, unable to speak, because I felt that if I opened my mouth, only uncontrolled crying would come out. We walked to her car, a modest but well-maintained gray sedan. During the drive to her house, Diane played soft music and didn't ask uncomfortable questions. She just held my hand in a silent gesture of support. Her house was small but cozy. Peach-colored walls, plants in every corner, family photos that showed a simple but happy life. She showed me the guest room, a room with a single bed, lavender curtains, and a window overlooking a small garden. "Stay as long as you need to," she said. "This is your home now." That night, I slept profoundly for the first time in months, perhaps in years. I didn't dream about Valerie or the restaurant or the $15,000 bill. I dreamed of the sea, with calm waves and white sand. I dreamed of peace. I woke up the next day with the sun streaming through the window. It was almost 10 o'clock in the morning. It had been years since I'd slept that late. I always woke up early, conditioned by decades of work and the constant anxiety of having to solve everyone's problems. But that morning, in Diane's house, I simply rested. I got up, showered, and put on clean clothes that Diane had left on a chair. They were a little big on me, but comfortable. I went down to the kitchen, following the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Diane was making breakfast: scrambled eggs, hash browns, and hot biscuits. Simple food, but made with love. "Did you sleep well?" she asked with a smile. "Better than in years," I replied honestly. We sat down to eat, and I finally told her everything. I told her about Valerie and how I had become her personal ATM. I told her about Aisha and Rochelle and all the parasites who had sucked the life out of me for years. I narrated in detail the humiliation at the restaurant, the $15,000 bill, and my silent escape. Diane listened without interrupting. When I finished, she just shook her head and said, "You did the right thing, Lena. Sometimes walking away is the only act of self-love we have left." Her words freed me from the last bit of guilt I was still carrying. After breakfast, I turned on my phone. It was time to face the storm I had left behind. The notifications exploded like fireworks. 122 missed calls, 87 messages. The voicemail was full. I took a deep breath and started reading. Valerie's first messages were confused. "Mom, where are you? Mom, this isn't funny. The waiter is waiting." Then came the panic. "Mom, please answer. I can't pay this. Where are you?" And finally the pure rage. "You're a selfish jerk. You abandoned us." What kind of mother does this? I read every message with a calm that surprised even me. The words that would have shattered me before now simply bounced off a shield I didn't know I possessed. Valerie was calling me selfish for not paying a $15,000 bill that she had deliberately created to humiliate me. The irony was so grotesque it was almost funny. There were messages from Aisha too. "Lena, Valerie told me what happened. I can't believe you left us like that. Family is sacred. Family is sacred." How easy it is to talk about how sacred family is when you're not the one paying all the bills, when you're not the one sacrificing your dreams for the whims of others. Rochelle had only written once, "I didn't think you were capable of something like that." What a disappointment. I deleted the message without replying. I owed no one an explanation. But there was another message that surprised me. It was from Derek, Valerie's husband. "Lena, I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but Valerie is destroyed. We had to pay the bill with 4 different credit cards. Now we have a $15,000 debt plus interest. I don't know how we're going to get out of this. She won't stop crying. She says you ruined her life. Please at least call her." I read that message 3 times, and each time I felt less compassion. Valerie said I had ruined her life. I, the mother who had sacrificed everything for her, the one who paid for her education, her failures, her whims, the one who never said no until there was nothing left of myself, and now I was the villain of the story. Diane sat next to me and read my expression. "Are you going to respond?" she asked. I thought for a long moment. Part of me wanted to write a long message explaining everything, defending myself, justifying myself, but then I realized I didn't need to. My actions spoke for themselves. Finally, I wrote a single message and sent it to Valerie. "I spent my entire life being your ATM. I financed your studies, your failures, and your whims. I gave you everything I had, and the only thing I received in return was humiliation. That night at the restaurant, you called me an ATM in front of 30 people. You used me. You ridiculed me. You expected me to pay $15,000 as if my money had no value, as if I had no dignity. Well, the ATM is out of order. I will not give you a single red cent again. The debt you have is yours, not mine. The consequences of your actions are yours, not mine. Learn to live with them. Do not contact me again." I sent the message and blocked her number immediately. Then I blocked Aisha, Rochelle, and all the parasites who had drained my energy and money for years. One by one, I erased them from my life with a simple digital gesture, and with each block, I felt like I was breathing better. Diane hugged me. "I'm proud of you," she said. And those words meant more than anything Valerie had ever said to me. Planting seeds of dignity. The following days were strange but liberating. Valerie tried calling me from other numbers. She asked friends and acquaintances to contact me. A message even appeared from an unknown number claiming to be a lawyer, threatening to sue me for abandonment. I laughed. There was no law that required me to pay the voluntary debts of my adult daughter. Meanwhile, my life in Charlotte began to take shape. Diane introduced me to her friends at the book club. Women my age, some widows like me, others divorced, all with stories of liberation and rebirth. We met twice a week to discuss books, drink coffee, and share our lives without judgment. One afternoon, Diane took me to a painting workshop. I had never painted in my life. I had always wanted to, but never had the time, or rather, I never gave myself permission to take that time. That day, I painted a sunset over the sea. The colors were chaotic and uneven, but it was mine. It was my creation, and no one could take it away from me. I also started walking in the mornings in the park near Diane's house. There was a small botanical garden with all kinds of plants. I spent hours there, reading the plaques with the scientific names, learning about flowers I had never seen. It was like rediscovering the world from scratch. One morning, while watering the plants in Diane's garden, I received a message from a number I hadn't blocked. It was from a distant cousin named Avery, someone I barely knew. "Lena, I just wanted to tell you that everyone in the family is talking about what happened. Some say you did wrong, but I think you did the right thing. Valerie was always a user. It was time for someone to set boundaries. I hope you are well. Take care." That message made me cry, not from sadness, but from validation, because it meant that at least one person in that family circus understood. At least one person saw the truth behind the facade. I replied with a simple, "Thank you, Avery. I am better than ever." And it was true. For the first time in decades, I was living for myself, without guilt, without artificial obligations, without the burden of being everyone's savior. I was free. 3 weeks passed since that night at the restaurant, 3 weeks in which I slowly began to rebuild myself. Diane offered for me to stay as long as I needed, and I gratefully accepted. Every morning, I woke up in that room with lavender curtains and felt like I was living a life I didn't know I could have. A life where my decisions were mine, where my money was mine, where my peace was mine. I signed up for more classes besides painting. Now I took a ceramics workshop on Tuesdays and Thursdays. My hands, which for years had only served to open my purse and hand out money, were now creating things. Imperfect mugs, crooked plates, small sculptures that had no commercial value but were treasures to me, because they were proof that I could still learn, that I could still grow, that my life hadn't ended at 69. It was just truly beginning. One afternoon, while working on a clay pot at the workshop, I met a man named Marcus. He was 72, a widower like me, and he had the hands of an artist. He made clay figures with a precision that I admired. We started talking about techniques, about clay, about how therapeutic it was to create something with your hands. Eventually, our conversations expanded beyond the workshop. We shared coffee after class. We walked through the botanical garden. It wasn't romance, at least not yet. It was something more valuable, genuine friendship. Marcus told me that his wife had died of cancer 5 years ago, that his children lived in different states and visited him once a year if he was lucky, and that he had learned to enjoy his solitude instead of suffering from it. Solitude and peace are sisters, he told me one afternoon as we watched the flowers in the garden. When you learn to be alone without feeling lonely, that's where you find true freedom. His words resonated deeply with me because that was exactly what I was learning. To be alone without feeling lonely, to enjoy my own company, to not need the constant validation of a family that never truly valued me. The domino effect. Meanwhile, the news coming from Atlanta painted a very different picture. Avery, my distant cousin, who had become my only contact with the world I'd left behind, kept me informed. He told me that Valerie had had to sell her car to pay off part of the credit card debt, that Derek had taken a second-night job at a gas station to help with the payments, and that their marriage was on the verge of collapse because he blamed her for the situation, and she blamed him for not having enough money. He also told me that Valerie had tried to organize a family meeting to badmouth me, to make me the official villain of the family, but the meeting had been a failure. Aisha didn't go because she herself was facing financial problems that I had always solved and that no one else now wanted to solve. Rochelle didn't show up either, probably ashamed of having participated in that disastrous dinner. Of the 30 people who ate lobster and expensive wine that night, only 5 showed up to Valerie's meeting, and those 5 spent the afternoon listening to her complain without offering any real solution. The family was falling apart, but not because of my absence. It was falling apart because I had been the artificial glue that held together people who actually couldn't stand each other. Without my money, without my constant favors, without my infinite willingness to solve their problems, everyone discovered that they had nothing in common, that their only bond was their shared ability to take advantage of me. Avery told me all this with a tone that was both amused and sad. "It's like watching a building collapse," he told me over the phone. A building that was always poorly constructed, but no one wanted to admit it was about to fall. He was right, and although part of me felt sadness for the collapse of my family, a stronger part felt relief because it meant I had finally cut the chains. I was finally free. One Saturday morning, Diane proposed something unexpected. "Lena, I've been thinking. You have to make a decision about your future. Are you going to stay in Charlotte? Are you going back to Atlanta? Because if you stay, you need your own place. You can't live with me forever, although I would love for you to." She was right. I had been in a kind of limbo, living day by day without really thinking about the future. That afternoon, I sat in Diane's garden with a notebook and a pen. I made 2 columns. In one, I wrote, "Reasons to go back to Atlanta." In the other, "Reasons to stay in Charlotte." The first column remained completely empty. There wasn't a single valid reason to go back. My house there was full of painful memories. Valerie was still there, probably waiting for an opportunity to manipulate me again. Aisha, Rochelle, all the parasites were still there, ready to suck whatever was left of me. The second column, however, filled up quickly. Peace. New genuine friends, opportunities for growth, distance from toxicity. Diane, Marcus, the ceramics workshop, the botanical garden. A life that was finally mine. I made the decision that same day. I would stay in Charlotte. I would sell my house in Atlanta and buy something small here, something modest, but mine. A place where I could plant flowers and paint sunsets and create clay pots without anyone interrupting me to ask for money. I told Diane my decision, and she hugged me with tears in her eyes. "I'm so happy," she said. "Charlotte has given you back your life." And she was right. This place, this city I barely knew 3 weeks ago, had given me something my own family never could: the freedom to be myself. I hired a lawyer in Atlanta to handle the sale of my house. I gave him clear instructions. I wanted no direct contact with anyone in my family. Everything would be done through him. Valerie tried to interfere, of course. She called the lawyer, crying, saying the house was her inheritance, that I had no right to sell it. But the lawyer, a professional and direct man, explained that the house was in my name, that I had every legal right to sell it, and that her opinions were irrelevant. The house sold in less than a month. I received $325,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more than enough to buy something modest in Charlotte and live comfortably with my pension. Valerie sent me a message from a new number I hadn't blocked yet. "You could at least give me a part of that money. I'm your daughter. I need it to pay the debts you caused." I let out a bitter laugh. The debts I caused. How convenient it was to rewrite history. How easy it was to blame me for a dinner she organized, a humiliation she orchestrated, a bill she deliberately created. I blocked that number too and moved on. The Queen Elizabeth rose. With the money from the sale, I bought a small house on the outskirts of Charlotte. It had 2 bedrooms, a large kitchen with east-facing windows to catch the morning sun, and most importantly, a garden. It wasn't large, perhaps 250 square feet, but it was perfect. Fertile ground where I could finally plant something of my own. The day I moved in, Diane, Marcus, and the friends from the book club came to help me. Together, we carried my few belongings, cleaned the house, and hung light yellow curtains that I had chosen myself. When we finished, we sat in the garden drinking homemade lemonade. The sun was setting slowly, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. And in that moment, surrounded by people who appreciated me for who I was and not for what I could give them, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades: pure happiness. "To Lena," Diane said, raising her glass. "To her courage, to her new life." Everyone toasted. And I, with tears streaming down my cheeks, toasted myself. To the woman who had finally found the courage to save herself. That night, alone in my new house, I stood in the garden under the stars. The earth smelled of possibility, of new beginnings. I thought about planting roses, tomatoes, and herbs. I thought about filling that empty space with life. And I realized that was exactly what I was doing with my own existence. Filling the void that years of abuse and exploitation had left, planting seeds of peace, dignity, and self-love. The ATM had been destroyed. In its place, a free woman had finally been born. The months passed like pages in a book that finally had a happy ending. Summer came to Charlotte with its warm afternoons and cool nights. My garden began to transform under my hands. I planted coral-colored roses in one corner, herbs near the kitchen, and in the center, a small lemon tree that Marcus helped me plant. Every morning, I went out with my coffee to observe the progress. Every new leaf, every bud, every opening flower was a silent victory over my past. My life had found a quiet but satisfying rhythm. Mondays and Wednesdays, I went to the painting workshop. Tuesdays and Thursdays, to ceramics. Fridays, the book club met at Diane's house or mine, alternating. On weekends, I explored Charlotte with Marcus. We visited small museums, walked through the historic downtown, and sat in old coffee shops talking about books, art, and life. Slowly, without any pressure, our friendship began to transform into something deeper. It wasn't the passionate love of youth, it was something better. Chosen companionship, mutual respect, a tenderness that didn't need words to exist. The unexpected apology. As my life flourished, the news coming from Atlanta painted a very different picture. Avery kept me informed, although I had asked him to only tell me the essentials. I didn't want to obsess over the life I had left behind, but some stories were impossible to ignore. Valerie had lost her job. The design firm where she worked part-time had officially fired her due to staff cuts, but Avery told me the truth. The restaurant scandal had reached her boss's ears. Someone had shared the story on social media, and it had gone locally viral. The woman who humiliated her mother and left her with a $15,000 bill was the headline circulating. Valerie tried to deny the story, but there were too many witnesses. 30 people had been there that night, and in the age of social media, secrets don't exist. Her marriage to Derek finally fell apart. He grew tired of working 2 jobs to pay a debt she had created. He got tired of her tantrums, her projected guilt, and her inability to take responsibility. One night, he simply packed his things and left. Valerie was left alone in an apartment she could no longer afford, with debts that grew every month and without her personal ATM to rescue her. She tried to get loans from other relatives. She called Aisha, who hung up on her. She called Rochelle, who told her she had financial problems too. She called aunts, cousins, acquaintances. No one wanted to help her. Because everyone had heard the story, everyone knew what she had done, and no one wanted to be the next ATM. Aisha, my sister, wasn't doing well either. Without my constant loans, she had to face the reality that she lived beyond her means. She had to sell her newer car. She had to move to a smaller house. Her husband, who had enjoyed the money I indirectly gave them for years, now blamed her for ruining the relationship with me. The fights were constant. The perfect marriage she always boasted about turned out to be as false as everything else. Rochelle had disappeared from the family radar. After the restaurant scandal, she distanced herself from everyone, probably ashamed of having participated in that public humiliation, or perhaps simply because there were no more resources to extract. Parasites always disappear when the host stops feeding them. Hearing these stories produced conflicting feelings. On one hand, there was a part of me that felt a dark satisfaction seeing that everyone was finally facing the consequences of their actions, that the universe was collecting the bill they had charged to my account for years. But on the other hand, there was deep sadness, because these people were my family, because Valerie, despite everything, was still my daughter. And a part of me, the maternal part that never fully dies, wondered if I had been too harsh, if I should have sought a different way to set boundaries. One night, while having dinner with Diane and Marcus at my house, I shared these doubts. "Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing," I said as I served the pasta I had cooked. "Valerie is destroyed. Her life is a mess, and I'm her mother. Shouldn't I be there to help her?" Diane looked at me with that wisdom that only years can give. "Lena, there's a difference between helping and enabling. For decades, you helped her. You paid for everything, solved everything, forgave everything. And what did she learn? Nothing. She only learned that she could use you without consequences. What she is experiencing now is not punishment. It's education. Life is teaching her the lessons you could never teach because you always protected her from her own decisions." Marcus nodded. "Children need to fall to learn how to get up. You never let her fall. Now she is falling, yes, but she is also learning. And maybe, just maybe, this fall will turn her into a better person. Or maybe not, but that is no longer your responsibility." Their words gave me peace, because they were right. I was not responsible for fixing Valerie's life. Not anymore. She was a 42-year-old adult woman. It was time for her to learn to walk alone, even if that meant stumbling 1,000 times before finding her balance. Forgiveness, not amnesia. September arrived with gentle rains that made my garden bloom with renewed intensity. The coral roses were brighter than ever. The lemon tree had given its first small fruits, and I felt more alive than in decades. I had also started writing. Nothing serious, just a journal where I recorded my thoughts, my days, my discoveries about myself. Diane had suggested that I write my entire story, that perhaps it could help other women trapped in similar situations. I was considering it. One October afternoon, 6 months after that night at the restaurant, I received a call from an unknown number. I normally didn't answer numbers I didn't recognize, but something made me respond. It was Valerie's voice, but not the arrogant, manipulative Valerie I knew. It was a broken, humble, almost unrecognizable voice. "Mom," she said, and that single word contained oceans of pain. "I know I have no right to call you. I know I don't deserve a minute of your time, but I need to tell you something. I need to apologize." I remained silent, waiting. "I've lost everything, Mom. My job, my marriage, my house, my dignity, and in the middle of all this darkness, I finally understood something. I understood what I did to you for years. I used you. I treated you like an object. I stole your peace, your money, your life. And I thought it was my right, that because I was your daughter, you owed me everything. But it wasn't like that. You didn't owe me anything, and I owed you everything. And I never thanked you. I never valued you. I never truly saw you." I heard her crying on the other end of the line, crying that sounded genuine, crying that came from a deep place of real remorse. "I'm not calling to ask you for money," she continued. "I'm not calling to ask you to rescue me. I'm calling to tell you I'm sorry, that I understand why you left, that I understand I destroyed our relationship with my own hands, and that if you never want to speak to me again, I'll understand. I deserve it." There was a long silence. My heart beat loudly in my chest. Part of me wanted to hang up. Part of me wanted to scream all the pain I had accumulated over the years. But another part, a wiser part, recognized something important in her voice. I recognized the sound of someone who had finally hit rock bottom, someone who was finally ready to change. "Valerie," I said finally, in a calm but firm voice, "I accept your apology, and I forgive you. But forgiveness does not mean amnesia. It doesn't mean we will go back to the relationship we had. That relationship was toxic and destructive. You used me, and I allowed you to use me. We both failed. We both need to change." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. "If you truly want to rebuild some kind of relationship with me, it won't be like before. I am no longer your ATM. I am no longer your solution for everything. I am your mother, yes, but I am also a person with boundaries, with dignity, with the right to my own peace." "I understand," she whispered. "Is there any way we can start over, even slowly?" I thought about her question. I thought about everything I had experienced these 6 months, my garden, my house, my peace, and I realized I was strong enough to give her a chance, but on my terms. "We can try," I told her. After that call, I established clear rules. Valerie could visit me, but only when I was ready. There would be no money involved in our relationship, no loans, no gifts, no financial rescues. If she wanted to rebuild a connection with me, it would have to be based on mutual respect, not economic transactions. I gave her the address of my new house in Charlotte and told her she could come to visit in 2 weeks. I needed that time to prepare emotionally, to strengthen my boundaries, to make sure I wouldn't fall back into old patterns. During those 2 weeks, I spoke a lot with Diane and Marcus about the situation. Diane was cautious. "Be careful, Lena. Manipulators know exactly what to say when they want something. Make sure her repentance is real, not just another strategy." Marcus was more optimistic. "People can change when they hit rock bottom. Give her a chance, but don't lower your guard. Keep your boundaries like steel walls." I prepared my house for Valerie's visit, not as I would have before, trying to impress or please her. I simply cleaned, bought some groceries to prepare a simple lunch, and made sure I had tea and coffee. I didn't want the visit to be tense, but I also didn't want to pretend everything was fine. This would be a real, honest conversation, perhaps uncomfortable, but necessary. Valerie arrived on a Saturday morning by bus. She didn't have a car, she had had to sell it. When I opened the door, I almost didn't recognize her. She had lost weight. Her clothes, though clean, were simple and old, none of the luxury she used to show off. Her hair was longer, without the expensive dye she always used, but the most impactful thing was her gaze. She no longer carried that arrogance. Her eyes showed something different. Humility, shame, genuine pain. "Hello, Mom," she said, her voice trembling. She didn't rush to hug me. She stood there, waiting for my permission. That simple gesture told me more than 1,000 words. I took a step forward and hugged her. It wasn't the warm hug from before. It was cautious, protected, but it was a start. I invited her in. Valerie looked at my house with silent astonishment. It was small, modest, nothing compared to what she probably expected, but it was full of light, plants, and soft colors. There were paintings I had done myself on the walls, ceramic pots I had made in the workshop, and books piled up in a small library. It was a real home, not a soulless warehouse of expensive things. "It's beautiful, Mom," Valerie said, and her voice sounded sincere. "It feels peaceful." We sat in the living room. I prepared tea for both of us, and then we started talking, really talking. For the first time in decades, Valerie told me everything. How, after that night at the restaurant, her life had crumbled piece by piece. How Derek had left her, blaming her for ruining their finances and reputation. How she lost her job when the story went viral. How she tried to ask the family for help, and everyone turned their back on her. How she was left alone in an apartment she couldn't afford, eating rice and beans because that was all her budget allowed. "I hit rock bottom, Mom," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I was so angry at you at first. I blamed you for everything. I said you had abandoned me, that you had ruined my life. But one night, sitting in that empty apartment without electricity because I hadn't paid the bill, I finally saw it. I saw what had really happened. I ruined my own life. I used you for years. I publicly humiliated you. I created that debt monster, and you simply refused to continue being my victim." I listened without interrupting. Her pain was real. Her repentance seemed genuine, but I had learned to protect my peace. So when she finished speaking, I took a deep breath and told her my truth. "Valerie, for your entire life, I gave you everything you asked for. I sacrificed my dreams, my money, my peace of mind to ensure that you were okay. But in doing that, I did you a terrible harm. I never taught you the value of work. I never let you face the consequences of your decisions. I was always your safety net, and you learned that no matter what you did, I would always be there to rescue you. That wasn't love. That was negligence, disguised as generosity." Valerie nodded, wiping her tears. "I know. And I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm sorry I treated you like an object. I'm sorry I wasted everything you gave me. I'm sorry I humiliated you at that restaurant. That night was the worst mistake of my life. I thought it would be funny that everyone would laugh and you would pay, as always. I never imagined you would say enough, but you should have done it years ago." "You're right," I admitted. "I should have set boundaries much sooner, but it's never too late to start. So here are my terms if you want us to try to rebuild something. First, you will never ask me for money again. Not loaned, not gifted, not as an emergency. If you need financial help, you will look for a job, you will ask for a bank loan, but you won't come to me. Second, our meetings will be when I am ready, not when you need them. You will respect my space and my time. Third, if you ever disrespect me again, this door will close permanently. There will be no third chance." Valerie listened to every word carefully. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "I accept all your terms, Mom. I don't even deserve this opportunity, but I promise I'm going to change. I've already started. I got a job at a coffee shop. It doesn't pay much, but it's honest. I'm living with a coworker in a small room. I'm paying off my debts, little by little. I'm learning to live with what I have, and for the first time in my life, I'm not waiting for someone else to solve my problems." Her words touched me, but I kept my guard high. Words were easy. Actions would be the true test. "I'm glad to hear that, Valerie, and I support you in your growth process, but that support will be emotional, not financial. I can listen to you, I can advise you, I can be your mother in the real sense of the word, but I will no longer be your savior." We spent the rest of the day talking, this time not about money or problems. We talked about books, about my garden, about her work at the coffee shop. I showed her my paintings and my ceramic pots. I told her about Diane, about Marcus, about my new life. Valerie listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she truly wanted to know me as a person, not just as a source of resources. When it was time for her to leave, I walked her to the bus station. Before she got on, she hugged me. "Thank you, Mom, for not giving up on me, for teaching me the hardest but most important lesson of my life. I'm going to do better. I promise." I watched her leave with mixed feelings, hope blended with caution, love mixed with protection. A garden of choice. In the following months, Valerie kept her word. She called me once a week, just to talk. She told me about her job, about how she was learning to manage her money, about the low-cost therapy she had started. She never mentioned economic needs. She never asked for favors. Slowly, very slowly, we began to build something new. It wasn't the traditional mother-daughter relationship we had before. It was something different, more real, more honest, healthier. Meanwhile, my life continued to flourish. Marcus and I became officially involved. We didn't live together. We both valued our independence, but we spent a lot of time together. We had dinner at my house or his. We went to the movies. We walked through the historic downtown, holding hands like teenagers. It was a mature relationship without drama, without impossible demands. It was love in its purest form. Diane remained my rock, my confidant, the sister I chose, not the one I got by blood. Her house was my second home. Her family treated me as part of their own. At dinners, at celebrations, there was always a place for me, and I finally understood what it meant to have a real family. It wasn't about shared blood, it was about mutual respect, genuine support, and love without conditions or invoices. One December afternoon, almost a year after that night at the restaurant, I was in my garden watering the plants when Valerie called me. "Mom, I wanted to tell you something. I got a better job at a small design agency. I'm finally going to be able to use my degree. Also, Derek and I have been talking. We're not getting back together, that's for sure. But we're trying to finish things civilly, dividing the debt, signing the divorce papers without fighting. It's the right thing to do." I heard the pride in her voice. Not the arrogant pride from before, genuine pride from someone who was finally taking control of her life. "I'm so happy to hear that, Valerie. I'm proud of you." And I meant it, because watching my daughter finally grow up, finally mature, finally become a responsible adult was worth more than any amount of money I could have given her in the past. Thank you, Mom, for not giving up on me, for teaching me the hardest but most important lesson of my life. Losing you was the worst thing that ever happened to me, but it was also the best thing because it forced me to find myself. A year and a half after that night at the restaurant, my life was unrecognizable from what it had been. It was a spring afternoon when I decided to do something symbolic, something that marked the definitive closure of my old life and the celebration of the new. I bought seeds for a special rose at the nursery. The salesman explained that it was a variety called Queen Elizabeth, resilient, beautiful, blooming even in the most difficult conditions. It seemed perfect. Marcus came to help me plant it. We chose a special spot in my garden, right in front of my living room window, where I could see it every morning. While he dug the hole, I prepared the soil with compost. We worked in silence, that comfortable silence that only exists between people who know each other deeply. When we finally placed the plant in its new home and covered it with soil, Marcus looked at me with that warm smile I had learned to love. "This rose is going to grow strong," he said. "Just like you." He hugged me, and we stood there in the middle of the garden I had built with my own hands, contemplating all the plants I had sown. Each one represented something. The herbs were my rediscovered pleasure in simplicity. The tomatoes growing in a corner were my self-sufficiency. The lemon tree was my recovered sweetness. And now, this rose, the Queen Elizabeth, would be my symbol of total rebirth. Valerie came to visit that weekend. She came every 2 months now, always respectful, always grateful. Her transformation had been real and sustained. She had paid off almost all her debt. She worked full-time at the design agency and was building a portfolio she was proud of. She lived in a small, clean apartment, decorated with things she had bought herself through her own effort. When she arrived and saw the newly planted rose, she smiled. "It's beautiful, Mom, like everything you've created here." We walked through the garden, and I showed her each plant, telling her the stories behind them. Valerie listened with genuine interest. She was no longer the arrogant woman who had humiliated me at that restaurant. She was someone completely different. Someone who had been broken by her own actions and who had chosen to rebuild herself better. During the lunch we prepared together, Valerie asked me a question she had been avoiding for months. "Mom, will you ever be able to forgive me completely?" I took a moment to think about my answer, because it was an important question that deserved an honest response. "I have already forgiven you, Valerie," I told her finally. "But forgiveness does not mean amnesia. I will always remember what happened. That memory is not resentment. It is wisdom. It reminds me to maintain my boundaries. It reminds me of my worth." Valerie nodded with tears in her eyes, but also with understanding on her face. After lunch, I told her something I had been considering. "I'm going to write a book," I said, "about my experience. I think there are many women like me, trapped in toxic family relationships, who need to hear that it's okay to say enough." Valerie looked at me with pride. "You should do it, Mom. Your story can help a lot of people, and you can use my part of the story too. Uncensored." Those words moved me deeply. The following months were dedicated to finishing the manuscript. I wrote every morning after watering the plants. Diane and Marcus read every chapter and gave me feedback. I found a small publishing house that was interested in my story. The book resonated with more people than I imagined. Letters began pouring in from women telling me similar stories. All of them found something of themselves in my narrative. One of those letters touched me especially. It was from a 50-year-old woman who had read the book and had finally found the courage to leave her abusive husband. "Your story saved my life," she wrote. I cried reading that letter, because if my pain had served to save even one person, then everything had been worth it. 2 years after that night at the restaurant, I organized a small gathering in my garden. Diane was there with her husband. Marcus, of course, the friends from the book club. Valerie came with her new boyfriend, a calm man who treated her with genuine respect. Even Avery, my cousin, drove 4 hours to be present. It wasn't a celebration of anything specific. It was just a gathering of the people who truly mattered. We cooked food together, we laughed, we shared stories. And when the sun began to set, we all gathered around the Queen Elizabeth rose, which was now blooming magnificently. "I want to make a toast," I said, raising my glass. "To second chances, to the courage to say enough, to the gardens we build after they burn us down to the roots, and to the families we choose, not just the ones we get by blood." Everyone toasted. Valerie looked at me with tears in her eyes and silently mouthed, "Thank you." That night, when everyone had left and I was alone in my garden under the stars, I gently touched the petals of the Queen Elizabeth rose. 2 years had passed since I disappeared from that restaurant. 2 years since I stopped being my family's ATM. And in those 2 years, I had found something I didn't know I could have: true peace. I no longer woke up with anxiety, thinking about what new crisis I would have to solve. I no longer measured my worth by how much money I could give. I had learned that my value lay in who I was, not in what I could provide. I looked at my garden. Every plant I had sown was growing strong. The lemon tree had fruit, the herbs filled the air with their fragrance, and the Queen Elizabeth rose shone under the moonlight like a crown of victory. This garden was the perfect metaphor for my life. I had taken soil that had been exploited for years and nurtured it until finally something beautiful could grow. I went into my house and poured myself a final cup of tea. I sat in my favorite chair by the window. Outside, the wind gently moved the leaves of my plants. Inside, I was at peace, complete, whole, free. I was no longer anyone's ATM. Now, I was simply Lena Dubois, a 71-year-old woman who had learned that saving yourself was not selfishness, it was survival. That saying no was not cruelty, it was self-love. That disappearing was sometimes the only way to finally appear. And as the night enveloped my little house in Charlotte, as my plants slept in the garden awaiting the morning sun, I closed my eyes with a smile, because finally, after a lifetime of giving until I was empty, I had learned the most important lesson. You cannot fill the cups of others if your own cup is broken. Now, my peace is my own, and that is the only thing that truly matters. Did you like my story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.